Egunon eta ongi etorriak. Bienvenidos a la presentación de este libro homenaje, Papers on Basque Linguistics in Honor of Jon Franco, que es la presentación de un libro, pero es sobre todo un homenaje a nuestro compañero Jon. Seguramente el lema de la Universidad de Deusto que más éxito ha tenido a lo largo de los años es el de el valor, o la persona es el valor es la persona. En el caso de Jon, ese tema es verdad en un doble sentido. El primero es genérico y seguramente aplicable a todas las personas. La centralidad de cada uno de nosotros, de todo el personal de la universidad, de los estudiantes, en la vida cotidiana. En términos kantianos, la persona como medida de toda nuestra actividad y no como medio para otros fines. El segundo sentido es más particular y tiene que ver con las características de cada persona, con lo que nos hace únicos. En este segundo sentido, Jon es el paradigma de una persona extraordinaria, única e insustituible. Irán saliendo hoy aquí también presentaciones, algunas serie de características personales de Jon como profesor, como mentor, como amigo, también como persona que se dedicó a la gestión. En cada una de ellas, Jon sobresalió por algo, pero además la manera en la que las combinaba era única, rompiendo además barreras de personas, de espacios académicos y personales, de geografías, de tiempos. En otras personas lo que Jon hacía hubiera sonado raro, pero en Jon se veía con naturalidad. Combinaba la generosidad en atención a las personas también con la perspectiva institucional. Por eso, tras su fallecimiento, cuando desde la facultad comenzamos a trabajar en su sustitución, enseguida tuvimos claro que no podíamos encontrar a una persona que lo sustituyera. No era posible, no existía esa persona. Jon era único. Hoy es un paso más en celebrar esa originalidad en lo académico, en lo relacional, en su generosidad, en su manera de ser profesor y de ser persona, que inspiró a muchos estudiantes y a muchos compañeros durante su estancia en la universidad. Simplemente quiero agradecer a todos vosotros y vosotras por acudir, a Itziar por su disponibilidad para estar con nosotros y tener la conferencia, y sobre todo también a Irene y a Alex por el esfuerzo realizado en coordinar los trabajos para que este libro en honor a Jon sea una realidad. Pues muchas gracias y seguro que disfrutamos este rato.
Egunon, jakin badakit Euskal Gaien Institutua ongi baino hobeto ordezkatua dagola hor. Egon nahi nukeen lekuan, baina ezin egon naitekeen lekuan. Zorionez, bitarteko teknologikoak baditugu eta aurrez aurreko eta gertuko komunikazioz bezalakoa baldin bada ere, tira, ordezkatu edo ordezkatu antzera edo egiten du. Esan beharrik ez daukat, Jon Franco, lankide, ikertzaileak, merezi baino mereziagoa duela omenaldi hau, eta Euskal Gaien Institutuak gogoz ekin zion proiektuari, eta gusto hundiz eta ilusio guztiz egin du ikertzaile deustukoak eta unibertsitate honetatik kanpokoak biali duten eta parte hartu nahi izan duten liburu interesgarri hau. Eskerrak eman nahi dizkiet, zer baino lehen parte hartu duten guztiei, eta seguru nago beren emaitzak itzala ere izango duela beste batzuetan ukitzen duten bezala halako ikertzaile handiak bildu ahal izan ditugu eta Familia ere eta etxekoak ere aipatu nahi ditut, ikertzen eta lanean gabiltzan ondoan, beste norbait eukitzen dugulako eta horien sostengua eta laguntza eta maitasuna gabe, nekez egin daitekelako bizitzan aurrea. Hitz hauek besterik ezin dizkizuete bidali, zoritxarrez ezin naizelako horregon, baina eskerrik asko denoi, disfrutatu baitere aldu zuen neurrian tarte honetaz, eta bitarteko teknologiei eskerren justu, bihar edo ikusiala izango dut, hortxe gaur egiten duzuena. Besarka handi bat denoi eta nahi duzuen arte.
Bueno, lehenengo eta behin, eskerrik asko dekano jaunari eta Elisabete Pérez Gaztelu, Euskal Ikasketen Institutuko zuzendariari. Buenos días a todas las personas que habéis venido a la presentación de hoy y también a las que estáis conectadas en remoto. Gracias al decano por su intervención para abrir este evento y a Elisabete Pérez Gaztelu por su saludo. Egunon danoi. El libro que hoy presentamos aúna el trabajo de mucha gente en torno a la lengua, a las lenguas. Y concretamente se ha realizado a través de 3 lenguas vehiculares de nuestro entorno académico, que son el euskera, el inglés y el castellano. Son nuestras herramientas de trabajo diario y así hemos querido constatarlo a través del proyecto que culmina con la presentación de este libro. Liburu honek amaiera ematen dio, berez, 2019an Jon Franco berak hasitako proiektu bateri. Une horretan, Jon Francok Euskal hizkuntzalaritzari buruzko topaketa zientifiko bat antolatzeko ideia izan zuen. Bere asmoa, arloko adituek euren lan apartekatu ahal izatea eta elkarlanean aritzea izan zen, euskararen egituraz eta jokabideari buruzko ezagutzaz hobeto jabetzeko. Topaketa hau irekia izango zen edonorentzat, baina indar iragilea berez, Deustoko Unibertsitatean ikasketak egindako partaide osatuko lukete. Beraz, Euskal hizkuntzalaritzari buruzko lehen topaketa gauzatu egin zen urte hartan, eta edukitako arrakastak 2. topaketa bateri bide eman zion hurrengo urtean, 2020an. Ondoren, 3. elkartaratze baterako lehen hurbilketa bat egin zuen Jon Francok, baina atzean utzi behar, galdu egin genuen zoritzarrez, Jon. Eta orduan, Euskal Ikasketen Institutuak eta Gizarte eta Giza Zientzietako fakultateak 3. topaketa hau aurrera ateratzea egin zuten posible. Bertan, aurkeztutako lanak dira gaur aurkezpen honetara ekarri dugunaren oinarri. So, Papers on Basque Linguistics in Honor of Jon Franco compiles the works of the participants in that 3rd Deusto workshop on Basque Linguistics, as well as other colleagues in the field. Their papers cover a wide range of issues related to theoretical, experimental, and interdisciplinary approaches to linguistic research, both in Basque, about Basque, and about the Spanish spoken in the Basque Country. They pose diverse array of questions regarding the structure and the use of Basque and Spanish. So in the book, there's a first set of papers that takes a diachronic approach to Basque. There is a second set of papers that focuses on morphosyntactic issues and compares the structure of Basque, Spanish, and other languages, and attempts at explaining grammatical concerns of language variation. A final 3rd set of papers sheds light on some phonetic and phonological description of certain varieties of Basque and the Spanish spoken in the Basque Country. All authors, in all, as well as other people that appear in the book, especially those in the final gratulatory table, have made possible to pay tribute to the scholarly figure of Jon Franco. Many were colleagues of Jon, but also many were former students of Jon who followed his professional wake. Jon Franco strongly believed in the influx of younger scientists because he thought they could contribute to bringing in new approaches and new views to the limits of well-known problems in linguistic theory. Jon constantly supported graduate students, and he encouraged them to believe in their work and to share it. So he launched a set of international encounters of graduate students back at the beginning of 2000. From 2004 up to 2007, he led with some graduate students what we called BIDE encounters of graduate students in linguistics. And there was even a summer institute of linguistics that took place, and in which we invited well-consolidated speakers and researchers in the field. So Jon also mentored and guided those students in their blossoming of their professional careers. I guess the third workshop on Basque Linguistics 2 years ago was Jon's last academic contribution. And here in Deusto, we felt the need to conclude his work, his initiative, and to honor his memory with this book. So we thank all the people who made it possible, all authors, other linguists, and colleagues of Jon for participating. We also thank the scientific committee, and especially Jon Ortiz Urbina, who was very supportive from the very beginning, and he always showed a positive disposition throughout the process of editing the book. And of course, we owe a special thanks to two more linguists. The first one is Alasne, Jon's wife, and the second one is Eukene, who is not here with us, but I believe she is in remote. And Eukene is also author. Eukene is Jon's daughter and also author in the book. They have both shared their experience and their thoughts in this last third encounter of Basque Linguistics 2 years ago. And they have shared with us their thoughts throughout the making of the book. To sum up, in all, it is our duty, I guess, to keep in mind Jon Franco's enthusiasm for the study of linguistics and his effort to encourage younger generations of academics into the field. We must carry on working and bringing in new initiatives for them. And this is what we have to do now, from now on. Thank you.
Bueno, egun ondan hori. Nik esan nahi dut lehenik eta bain guretzat liburua egitea nolabait beharra zela. Lehen jardunaldia gero liburua hori dena egin beharra zegoen, eta guk erronka hori onartu behar genuen. Behar eta nahi. Guk beraz nahi eta egin dugu lana oso gustura, eta zenfinean plazerratia izan da. Nolabait bete beharra baino oparia da guretzat liburua, opari bat. Esan behar dugu baita ez garela bakarrik egon zein honetan, Deustuko unibertsitateak, gure fakultateak, deikerrek eta batez Euskal Gaien institutuak babes osoa eman digute. Beharen laguntza eta institutuaren finantzaketa eta horren atzean Bizkaiko Foru Aldundia dago. Laguntza ezinbestekoa izan dugu. Beraz, haiei guztiei eskerrik asko benetan. Dena den funtsesko lana ez da gurea izan, jakina, guk horri sorta bat prestatu genuen, zurizko horri sorta bat, eta egilei pasatu genien, haiek bete zitzaten, benetako lana beraz haiena da. Eta ziur gaude, bete-betean egin dutela, gustura, profesionaltasunez, eta asmo honez, eta bihozez. Beraz, berrio ere, egile guztiei, eskerrik asko benetan. Guk diok, nahi dine, komentu dugu gure artean, pizkat, arraro, badedu ere, askotan sentitu dugu, prozesu osoan zer, askotan sentitu dugu nola baite denaren burua Jon Franco bera dela. Zerati dionte hau. Alde batetik guke askotan galdetu dugu gure buruari hau nola ingo luke Jonek edo zen nahi luke edo berari nola usatuko ditzaioke gauza hau eitea ez. Alde batetik eta bestetik jendearen erantzuna dago. Eta momentu guztietan jaso dugun erantzun tipoa hauxe izan da. Hau Jon Francorentzat da? Orduan nahi duzuena. Jon Francorentzat bada nahi duzuena. Hori da, betiko erantzuna. Eta lehen jarduna eta orain liburu hau aurrera eramateko prozesuan argi ikusi dugu jendeak nola ikusten duen Jon eta jendeak nola maite duen Jon. Hainbat momentutan jendeak Joni buruz esandakoa edo oroimenez egindakoa benetan ikaragarria izan da. Ez dut ustenik gure munduan jende asko daudenik horrelako erantzuna eragiteko gauza denik. Hain erantzun zabala benetakoa, oso zaila da hori sortaraztea. Eta prozesuaren gidaria edo Jon bera izan bada, eta lana egilena izan bada, zer egin dugu gubiok? Errekaduak, guke errekaduak egin ditugu. Eta errekadu asko egin behar izan dira, baina azken finean errekaduak baino ez, egin beharreko gauzak, baina banan garrantzi gabekoak edo gutxikoak. Eta hori bai, zeozer gaizki ikusten baduzue liburuan, hori bai, hori gure akatza izango da. Eta segura asko nirea. Bueno, hemen dago zue liburua eta orain zuek izan behar duzue, hola, ona den ala ez, Jon Francoek mezitako mailara heltzen den ala ez. Gure aldetik argi daukagu, alik eta liburuk onena egiten alegin dugula, lortzen liburuk onena lortzen saiatuko garela. Ez gubiok, bakizik eta hemen lagundu duten guztiok. Eta batez ere argi daukagu liburu hau benetakoa dela, bihotz ez egin da. Eta azkenean hori da argian importantena, bihotzetik sortutako zerbait eskaini, Jon Franco gure kide, lagunari eta Jon Francoen oroimenari. Para terminar, me gustaría, si me lo permitís, leeros un pequeño texto. En 1960, Jorge Luis Borges publica uno de sus mejores libros, El Hacedor, y se lo dedica a Leopoldo Lugones, que había muerto años atrás. Me apetece mucho leer un fragmento de esa dedicatoria, porque me parece que Borges expresa magníficamente, como siempre, lo que a mí me habría gustado escribir. La dedicatoria que, mutatis mutandi, pero la dedicatoria que a mí me habría gustado ser capaz de escribir para este libro. Supongo que muchos la conoceréis, pero bueno, allá va. Los rumores de la plaza quedan atrás y entro en la biblioteca. De una manera casi física siento la gravitación de los libros, el ámbito sereno de un orden, el tiempo disecado y conservado mágicamente. Estas reflexiones me dejan en la puerta de su despacho. Entro, cambiamos unas cuantas convencionales y cordiales palabras y le doy este libro. Si no me engañó, usted no me malquería, Lugones, y le hubiera gustado que le gustara algún trabajo mío. Ello no ocurrió nunca, pero esta vez usted vuelve las páginas y lee con aprobación algún verso. ¿Acaso porque en él ha reconocido su propia voz? ¿Acaso porque la práctica deficiente le importa menos que la sana teoría? En este punto se deshace mi sueño como el agua en el agua. La vasta biblioteca que me rodea está en la calle México, no en la calle Rodríguez Peña, y usted, Lugones, se mató a principios del 38. Mi vanidad y mi nostalgia han armado una escena imposible. Así será, me digo, pero mañana yo también habré muerto y se confundirán nuestros tiempos y la cronología se perderá en un orbe de símbolos. Y de algún modo será justo afirmar que le he traído este libro y que usted lo ha aceptado. Eskerrik asko danori.
Gracias, Alex. Vamos a dar paso a Anne Berro, que nos va a presentar a nuestra invited speaker, Itziar Laka. Después daremos paso a intervenciones de la gente que estáis escuchándonos, bien aquí en la sala o bien en remoto, por si queréis contribuir con algún comentario acerca de la presentación del libro, de los artículos y, por supuesto, de la figura de Jon. ¿De acuerdo? Así que vamos a hacer un cambio de escenario breve y volvemos. Egun on guztioi, eskerrik asko Irene eta Alex. Plazer handia da niretzat ekitaldi honetako hizlari gonbidatua aurkeztea, Itziar Laka anderea, EHUko hizkuntzalaritza eta euskal filologiako katedraduna. Itziar Laka is a professor at the Department of Linguistics and Basque Studies at the University of the Basque Country. And for those of you who don't know her or her academic career, here is a brief introduction. After obtaining the Basque philology degree at the University of the Basque Country, she left the Basque Country and traveled to the United States in order to continue her training as a linguist. In 1990, she defended her PhD entitled Negation in Syntax on the Nature of Functional Categories and Projections at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And those were years where she had the opportunity to work with prestigious linguists such as Noam Chomsky, Ken Hale, and many others. For the next years, she was an assistant professor of linguistics at the University of Rochester in New York. And she has been a visiting professor in many places such as Cusco, Rio de Janeiro, Napoli, Wassenaar in Holland, Vienna, and Utrecht. Since 1996, she is a professor at the University of the Basque Country back in home. Urte hauetan guztietan, 15 proiektu baino gehiagoren ikertzaile nagusia, koordinatzailea edo ikertzailea izan da, Euskal Herriko, Espainiako zein nazioarteko instituzioek diruz lagundutako egitasmoetan. Gainera, azken 13 urteotan, Eusko Jaurlaritzak lagundutako gogoelebiduna talde egonkortuaren zuzendaria da. Bestalde, euskaltzain urgazlea ere bada, eta jakigunde Euskal Herriko Zientzia, Arte eta Letren Akademiako kidea da. Her investigation combines theoretical and experimental linguistics with the objective of understanding the neural representation and computation of human language. She has been particularly involved in the study of syntax and bilingualism. She has outstanding and very referential publications in the area of negation, case system and ergativity, and the syntactic computation of bilingual speakers. Argitalpen eta lorpen hori ez guztiez gain, Itziar, hizkuntzalaritzako ikasle askoren irakaslea eta zuzendaria izan da, horietako asko gaur egun ikertzaileak eta irakasleak. Nik adibidez Itziar izan nuen hizkuntzalaritzako lehen irakasle, eta ari esker hasi nintzen deskubrintzen hizkuntza ikuspegi zientifikotik ere azter daitekela eta zeinen liluragarriak izan daitezken eremu horretan egiten diren aurkikuntzak. Gaur egun oraindik mantentzen dudan lilura. I'm sure this conference will be equally fascinating for the professors, students, and other participants today in this act.
Thank you very much. Eskerrik asko Itziar hemen egoteagatik gurekin. Nahi duzunean.
Papa. Bai, piztuta. Okay, I was told to do my conference in English, so in English I go, okay? First thing I want to say is that I am very, very, very honored to be doing this talk this day in the presentation of Jon's book. I mostly say no to most talk invitations, but this one, not only I am really, really moved that I got it, but I do it with great pleasure, okay? And since Jon was a rock and roller, I couldn't do my entire talk like that, but I did make a little effort to find rock and roll things to remind us of Jon. And this is why for those of you who are too young and have this defect, this is the cover of a record by Kate Bush. And the title of one of her songs is All We Ever Look For. I happen to like that song. And I take it for me because the general point that I want to make in this talk is that when we are processing language, the thing that we are looking for is an agent to start doing the work, okay? So I'm going to try to persuade you that finding the agent is the first command that we follow when we are encountering language and we have to process it, okay? So another thing I want to say before I start is that because Jon was such a great teacher, I do not want to give a kind of presentation I would give in a professional conference. And instead, I conceived of my talk as a lesson, right? So I'm going to be talking about problems, presenting you the questions. I'll present some answers, but it's all kind of in a simplified version. And my intent is to pique your curiosity so that maybe somebody here will then go and read the papers on which the stuff I'm going to present today is based, which is a little bit less friendly, right? So since we're doing memories, I lost my thing to say. Let's see if this works. Yeah, it works with the reader. Okay, so we were like that when we met, okay? So look at Jon, okay? Not that photograph we have in the book, that's a good photograph of him teaching, but I like this photograph of Jon because it reminds me of how I remember him, and it reminds me of a better version of all of ourselves. And I'm talking about the elders here. So I met Jon and Alasne, of course, one never went without the other, in California. And this is why we have California dreaming from the mamas and the papas. For those of you who have this problem of being too young, go and listen to this. And so that you see that it was not only Jon that looked different, all of us look different. So there you have Alasne. Jon appears to be giving instructions, but who is driving? Alasne. And so that you see that I also looked weird. I inserted a photograph of what I looked like approx at that time, okay? So there we were, young and happy. And I remember I met Jon Franco and Alasne at a professionally difficult time for me. I will never forget, they know that. And I went there to California, met them, and I still, you know, when you get older, you see you made a selection of memories, right? And these days are in my selection of memories. So I want to make this clear. Okay, so now let's move into something that looks like linguistics, right? That's what I was invited. Okay, here we go. Sorry that we have that green and red thing. I don't know why it is there, but on occasion it's going to be a bother because you won't be reading what I was writing below. Mostly it's titles, so it won't be very relevant. So since I organized this as a lesson, I'm coming with ancient questions that have not yet been solved, okay? I would rather say, I think they have been solved, but we pretend and we keep on going as if they hadn't. One of them is the category of subject a general property of human language, Or is it a property of some human languages, but not all? Yeah? This is an ancient story. The reason why I quote there Chomsky 1964, there's hundreds of people who've talked about this, but Chomsky made a bit of a splash in 1964 because at that time, the majority of linguists, I think, were assuming that subject, something like subject, was a linguistic universal and it was a primitive of language, right? Things are subjects. And what Chomsky argued was that it wasn't a primitive, but you'll see that it ends up kind of being a primitive in his argument, because he said subject is the nickname we give to a syntactic configuration, right? The external argument of V, I'm not going to get into that, right? So that it's not a primitive of the theory. Things are subjects if they end up in a particular position in the tree, in the structure. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that subject is not a general property of language. Some languages have subjects and therefore do certain things, and they have been studied to death. We still don't know many things about these languages, but certainly we know them far better than we know other kinds of languages that don't fall in this system. The second question that to me, because of the work I do, is inextricably related to the first is there in language processing, the first question is something about language theory or grammatical description, if you like. The second is a question about language processing. What do you do in your brain when language comes or when you want to produce it? And in language processing, there is also an old idea by a student of Chomsky, Tom Bever, one of the first students by Chomsky, Bever, who was among the first people who started studying language processing. And Bever had this original idea that has been followed up, which is that there is a subject initial processing strategy. What does this mean? That if you hear something that is going to be a noun phrase, because I say it's going to be, because by the time in Spanish, for example, by the time you hear la, you already are doing a noun phrase. So you're predicting, right? In processing, you don't wait. This is why it's important to know what bets you make when you process. So what Bever said is that speakers have a bias when they hear language. And whenever they are confronted with a noun phrase, they are going to make the hypothesis that that thing is a subject, right? And they are going to go on processing. And if they made a mistake, they'll have to come back, something like this. The subject initial preference has been reported widespreadly from many, many languages. Again, all those languages tend to be the kinds of languages that have subjects, like English and Spanish are. Okay? So there is a vast literature in language processing about the subject initial preference. What I'm going to put forth here, which is what I think is true, right? But we'll see, more research will be needed, is that in fact, the same way that I said that subjects are not a general property of human language, they're a property of some languages, the subject initial preference is to be detected only in languages that have subject. And deep down, it's a proxy for the agent preference, which is a principle that governs all languages and, in fact, human cognition. Okay? So basically, this is my pill today. Okay. It didn't change, right? Okay, here we go. So I oftentimes use an iceberg when I want to talk quickly about language, so you get how I see things, okay? And I'm not the only one who sees things this way. So the emergent part of the iceberg would be this, blah, 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 language, Spanish, Galician, Tagalog, right? That would be the thing that you see in the iceberg. But then language has a lot of hidden stuff, right? So things like meanings. Are meanings part of language or not? When we get into the world of meanings, we see that languages, or I'll show you examples now of what I mean. We see that we basically, all humans, speak the same language when it comes to the world of meaning. I know this sounds provocative for many people, but this is what I put forth to you. So sentences, subjects, things like that belong to languages. And notions like what an agent is, what a patient is, what an event is, those are meaning beasts. And to simplify in this lesson, I'll assume that the variation is found in the visible part of the iceberg and the submerged part of the iceberg is general for humans. Okay. Now, what do I mean when I say agents, patients? I keep losing this thing, right? That's me. Okay. What do I mean while I look for this thing? Did anybody see what I did? Right. Thank you. Okay. So let's consider these categories: agents, patients, events. What are those? Okay, this is so you'll understand me. Is that a sentence of a language? No, that's a photograph. Okay, but what do you all see there? I'm not going to ask because I don't have time. Okay, what do you all see there? You all there see a situation, an event, where a girl is hugging a teddy bear, right? Did anybody see anything different? No. Okay. Now, what do you see here? Again, this is not a sentence. This is an image, but it has a meaning. You interpret it. And what do you interpret? There is a ballerina here. And what is she doing? Dancing, right? So she is an agent because she is doing the dancing. Clear? All right. And what about this? It's hard to find photographs for this, right? So this is an event of falling, right? And now notice that this is very different from the ballerina, and it's very different from that girl hugging the teddy bear, because this woman is not doing anything. Something is happening to her. You see this difference? Obvious things, pay attention, because this is going to be key to continue understanding things. So here we have something that involves no agent, right? So in our world, this is going to be a patient, because this woman is undergoing a change of location, falling. Okay. These are, the table is set, and we're going to start playing now. Okay. So to sum up, events and roles. Events are things that happen, and they have participants. You cannot imagine an event that doesn't have participants, right? Humans cannot do this, because even when we talk about the weather, we imagine an agent making the weather, and this is general, okay? So humans are very keen about languages, or about agents, sorry. They look for agents, we all do. And we have plenty of evidence about this from cognitive science. I'm not doing linguistics right now. So in processing, we know that agents and patients, and I'm thinking of them as big proto roles for those of you who are expert on thematic roles, are very salient. So in processing literature, there is a lot of evidence for this difference between agent and patient. We also know that pre-verbal infants that don't speak yet have an agent preference already. They're already set up to look for agents. We know that in languages like Spanish and English, agents like to be subjects, right? They get to win and get to be subject. And we also know, because processing studies show this, and you'll see this work that's showing you this, I think, or I'll refer to it, that under ambiguity, whenever there is a possibility that something might be an agent, we don't even realize that we make the bet. It is an agent, okay? Am I getting my message across? We know this independently of language, okay? So, Basque. Now, this is my color coding so that Basque looks easy to you and we go to the relevant bits, otherwise there's no time. Red, ergative case. Blue, absolutive case, okay? And look at Basque. Emakumea gizona hil du. The woman killed the man. I don't like to use examples like this, but I have a reason why I chose this, right? So you'll see now. So a transitive sentence looks like that, and intransitive sentence looks like gizona hil da. I paint in color those words that look the same, right? So in blue go the two things in absolutive, in red the thing in ergative. Now, if you come here, for those elders of mine, remember that there is a paper in Linguistic Inquiry in 1970 signed by Jerry Fodor, who was somebody who thought deeply. And the title of it is 3 Reasons for Not Deriving Kill from Cause to Die. So I present the title of that paper and I present to you the Basque data. Okay, the verb has not changed and I am doing kill and die. So I'll leave it there. Let's move on. So you see that, if I can change this, oh, I don't know why. Okay, so now I change the example because I don't like the killing one, okay? And if I ask you what things are the same and what things are different, in the Basque case, the things that are the same are gizona, see? The thing that doesn't have an extra case. And it is the thing with the extra case is different. But if you take Spanish or English, the same for me, right? You will see that you can very easily identify a class that is morphologically consistent and you can call it subject and you will hardly ever have trouble doing that. Now, for the case of Basque, people have done this in the history of Basque, in fact, to argue that that is the class of subjects. That runs us into all sorts of problems, so I'm not going to explore that. Instead, what I am going to assume, and I have argued this elsewhere in more theoretical, less experimental work, is that well, Basque happens to be one of those ergative active languages, and the case morphology reflects agent and patient. That's it. So the K, I'm just going to tell you, K means agent. I insist proto-agent, so it includes cause, origin, all those, right? And when you don't have case, you have a patient, and that's the end of the story. And then English and Spanish are different languages, are nominative, and they have a class of subject, etc. Okay, but let me move on because I'm setting it up. And here, some more music that could look like Jon Franco playing the saxo, right? Or it could look like Alasne, right? So that's ambiguity. Now, humans and mammals in general, we have a brain because we have to survive. A brain is a machine to predict. The brain never waits. It makes a bet as soon as it can. Why? Because the brains that didn't predict belong to individuals that did not survive and they're not with us anymore, okay? So a brain is a predicting machine. And if you want to read a nice book, I would suggest to read Being You, which has been just translated about consciousness and the brain and everything. And this guy, who's a neuroscientist, constantly insists the brain was built for the body and not the other way around. And the brain is a machine to predict most. Give me a little bit of data and I'll make huge predictions. So why is ambiguity interesting when we work? How am I doing in time? Well, so why is ambiguity interesting to study language processing? Because when I give you something that could be this or could be that, right? If you show me that you, of the two things that you could interpret, you systematically interpret one, that is information for me, right? Or if you interpret the other, or if you chose both. So let me show you what I mean by it. Basque contains a morphological homophony, right? I don't know whether you see the blue one. Oh, I didn't do it dark enough. This is AK, ak, okay? So a word like emakume, ak, could be two things. It could be a singular agent, determiner plus ergative, or it could be plural absolutive, a bunch of women being patients, not being agents, right? So we've used this, here, okay? We use this ambiguity. We've been using it for many, many years, right? And we found out things because of it. So it could be, I could have a sentence like emakumea gizona ikusidu, agent, but I could have you saw the women, right? And I am making bars and everything, but in the real world, it's emakumea, right? So what do Basque speakers do with this? Well, we created an experiment. I'm going to go quickly with it, huh? Because I want to get to the end. Okay. There we go. I color coded, but you'll notice that the sentences are identical, right? You see that? I'm color coding because I'm using this ambiguity, and that sequence of sound, can be either one man saw several women or several women a man saw, the second one, right? And if you're thinking, no, but prosody differentiates them, I assure you it doesn't. We run all the experiments. Do the prosody you like. The ambiguity is maintained, except in Ondarroa, Marquina, few places which distinguish it with pitch accent, right? So what I mean is I'm going quickly, but we've looked into this carefully. So we did relative clauses. Pay attention to the colors, right? Now, if you do prenominal relative clauses in Basque, and you start with an ambiguous emakumeak, theoretically, in fact, the grammar allows two possibilities. It allows agent, gap, C, relative, and then now I get the gap, which is the object. So that would be an object gap relative, you see? And the second one, where emakumeak is interpreted as plural absolutive, and then the gap would be a subject gap, right? So you hope you know enough linguistics for the gaps of the relatives. But even if you don't know, you should know that before we did this work, consistently, people had reported in language processing that subject gap relatives, that is one below in this case, have an advantage, a processing advantage over object gap relatives. So much so that it was thought to be a property of language processing. Now, what we found again in this was a work we published in Cognition in 2011, is that it was the one above that people preferred, right? So the advantage was for the object gap relative. But notice that paper contains many things. From there, I only want to select this thing that I am trying to persuade you of. You see that Basque speakers preferred to interpret that ambiguous word emakumeak as an agent. And if you make that initial assumption, you can explain this asymmetry that runs contrary to what people in nominative languages were reporting. So we don't have to invent anything. It's just the agent preference. Do the agent preference and these effects follow. And now, ready for a headache? Since Basque also has postnominal relatives, we realize that for postnominals, the prediction is the contrary. If you have an agent preference in Basque and you do a postnominal relative, then the subject gap should have an advantage. And that is what we found, right? We know that these are stilted and blah, 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 everything you like, but you give people these types of sentences in Basque, and now they show a subject gap preference. But this follows if you make the assumption that the first word you hear is an agent, right? Okay. Now, in the paper with which we contributed to Jon Franco's volume, we were pursuing this idea because notice that so far we have a emakumeak. People prefer to interpret it as an agent. Yeah, but it could be also that it's a singular, right? Maybe singulars are easier than plurals, and this is why they are preferring emakumeak, because it's a singular. So with Laura Belaplo, Kepa Erdocia, and me, we decided to use another ambiguity, which is a demonstrative system. In the plural, as you see on the right, I have awek, oyek, ayek in the absolutive case, and the same form in the ergative, awek, oyek, ayek. It does not happen in the singular paradigm, it only happens in the plural. So this is perfect for us to kill that last curiosity, right? They are the same in number. Now we're going to see whether they prefer the agent or the patient. And what we find, Laura was the first author here and she ran the experiment. What we find indeed is that when you give people sentences that contain a serie horiek, adibidez, sorry, I was going to go language switch into Basque. So if you present Basque speakers with noun phrases like emakume horiek, which in principle could be absolutive or it could be patient or agent, what you see is that the agent one, you see the line that is solid, that graphic is showing you that people went faster with sentences where a serie horiek, adibidez, ended up being an agent, right? So that means that that was the hypothesis they were making. And if they found later on that a serie horiek was not the agent, but the patient, they had to revise their hypothesis. And this is why you get to see, I don't know where the pointer is, but you see the broken line is higher, more milliseconds. This is all measured in milliseconds. The language goes very fast. So here again, we confirm that it's not because of the number. Indeed, it is the agent preference that is driving Basque speakers like that. Okay. So tentative conclusion would be like this. In nominative languages, it makes sense to have a subject initial preference because you don't know whether that, until you hit the verb, you don't know whether that is going to be an agent or a patient, right? But in Basque, you have a devoted marker for the agent. So that decision, you make it already when you see the noun phrase. You can do that, okay? So that in nominative languages like Spanish, we would have that. The class of subject is not thematically consistent, right? So it's a wise thing to have a subject preference and then decide, is this an agent or is this a patient? But in languages like Basque, morphology is already telling you, I'm an agent, so you've already done that work. And it's consistent. And then when you don't see that K marker, that means I'm not an agent, right? So, and I want to finish with this. This is what we've done after the contribution to John's book. So let's go to intransitives, right? Because in intransitives, I'm going to find intransitives that are agentive, right? Like Ana danza, Ana dances, Anak. Look at that. Danza to do. And then we have non-agentive intransitives, right? In Spanish and in English, morphology is the same. It won't make a difference. But in Basque, morphology pays great attention because now I don't have an agent. Therefore, now I don't have a K. Okay. In technical circles, agentives are called anergatives, which is a very bad name when you work with ergative languages. That's why I try not to use it. And non-agentives are called anaccusatives, which is also a very bad name. Very, very bad labels, those. So I'll try to use agentive, non-agentive. Okay. So what we find is that in Spanish and languages like this, these are the effects you get when you deal with non-agentives, Ana falls or Ana arrives, versus agentives, Ana dances, Ana kicks, okay? And that is that there are people need more time to process the non-agentive ones, Ana falls, right? They also make more errors. If you're evil and you prepare an experiment with errors, they will fall more often when they're dealing with non-agentives. They also require more time when they're looking for words. In a phase 6, we find that they have greater difficulty with types of intransitives. And for those few people who've done hemodynamic research on this, they see that it recruits more cortical space. That means more effort. So all these measures show us that in Spanish or English, processing something like Ana falls is more work than processing something than Ana dances, okay? Okay. Now, now, back. We wanted to ask this question. Is this a general property of languages? And I will present to you that it ain't. It is not. The difference between agentive and non-agentive predicates is a property of human language or cognition, or whichever you want to call that gray border between language and thought. But this effect that the non-agentive takes more cognitive effort than the agentive, I put forth to you, is language dependent. This is not a property of language. Let me show you why we say this. Guillen Martinez de la Hidalga worked with us. He did a thesis on Basque morphology with bilinguals. There were many topics. I select one that was of interest to us. And that is that we found that in Basque, people require longer time processing the agentive than the non-agentive. You see? So, Anak danzatzen du takes longer than Ana erori da. Why we think this is? There is more morphology in the agentives to process than in the non-agentives. And this is electrophysiology, which is extremely sensitive to one more consonant, one more vowel, one more syllable. Now, also, if we look at effort, this I'll go quickly. These maps show us that for Basque speakers, it's the agentive sentences that require more effort. The non-agentives require less effort. So we think that intransitive sentences are processed differently depending on whether they are agentive or not. And this happens everywhere in all human languages. This difference is a property of human language. What we think is not a property of human language, but rather a property of some languages, those that have subjects, is that an accusative sentences, that is non-agentive sentences require more processing effort, right? That is the one that we think is language particular. How much time I got? Because maybe, oh, okay. I always think that's why I want to, because I don't want to go over time. Okay, so I have time. Now, so where are we at? We are at the following. We have strong evidence, and then also, since we have time, I can tell you, there is work that has been recently published and will be published, done in collaboration with people in Zurich. Aitor Egurtzegi, who defended his dissertation this morning, and Arrate Isasi-Sasmendi. And they, in this team, they are also looking with other methods to agent preference, and they also find a very strong agent preference in Basque, okay? So we find that in every experiment, with every measure, however we have thought of the experiment, it emerges. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is, let's look into Spanish a little bit more, right? So far, what I am proposing to you is, look, there are languages like Spanish, which have a category of subject, right? It's not thematically consistent, so you don't know whether that is going to be an agent or a patient or what. But your language processing mechanism has like the first command of those 10 commands. The first one is find the agent, okay? So if you are in a nominative language, it's easier to go, well, let me find the subject first. And then when I hit the verb, I will know whether it's an agent. I have no other way to do it, see? Ana, subject, but I cannot know whether it's subject or patient. I can only know it when I get to baila. You see that? Whereas in Basque, anek, you already know that's an agent. I don't care what the lexical verb is. I've already done this job. Okay. So let's move a little bit into Spanish in this slide, because this is a piece of job. The recent paper that I don't know. It's the center one. Okay. So this is the paper we published in PLOS ONE, sorry. And this is an eye tracking study, right? And I am very happy because there is John Laka there, who works at the University of Deusto and happens to be my brother, and is a terrific statistician. And this was so complex to analyze the data that we brought him into the team to make sure the models were fitted properly and everything was done properly. So to be able to get our work out in PLOS ONE, basically. And here what we do is we're going to use eye tracking, and we're going to compare what people do with different subjects. And we're going to show them transitive subjects, agentive subjects, and patient subjects. And now you know what I'm talking about because I gave you the little tutorial at the beginning, right? And here I'm going to go quickly, and if you are interested, you can move on to the paper. So this is eye track. Sorry, this is eye track. I was going to drop the mic. This is eye tracking, but this is world vision paradigm is called. So basically, you hear a sentence, that is the sentence that you would hear in this case. La señora dijo que el ratón negro, peludo y grande cayó ese día por las escaleras del edificio. This is what you are hearing. Meantime, we have you in a machine that is measuring every small movement your eyes make, even when your pupil dilates, which is also a sign of cognitive effort. Okay? So there are all kinds of measures we can take from your eyes. And here, basically, the measure we want to take is, what do you look at as the sentence unfolds? Okay? And the reason why we wanted to do this was because we wanted to see, first, whether all agents will have the same pattern, regardless of transitivity, which was our hypothesis. We also wanted to see whether the non-agentive subject would have a different pattern of reactivation and attention, right? Because when we look at eye movement, we are looking at what attention we are paying to the elements. Okay, so I'm telling you this very short, huh? It's very mysterious to me. When and how. Yes. That's the pointer, and this. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So quickly, and if you're curious, go to the paper. Blue and red are agentive subjects. The red one, I think is, the red one is the transitive, the blue one is the intransitive, right? And the green stuff is the patient subject. And all I want to show you, I don't want to go deep, the methodology is complex. That's for another talk, okay? But all I want you to see is that consistently, I'll show you 3 slides. Consistently, you will see the agents align and the patient go its separate way. Look. Again. Bye, Mercedes. Dana, que vengo de okay, listo. Okay, bye. Naikuada. Urrengo. Okay, so what we see in Spanish also is that agents go together and patients are treated completely differently, right? But, okay, well, I have plenty of time. I thought I wouldn't have time to say this. So what we see, I'm going to do a interim summary. What we see is that when we are processing intransitive sentences, the comparison of time, the asymmetry between the agentive and non-agentive goes one way in Spanish and the other way in Basque. You see that, right? Now, in Spanish, the reason why non-agentive intransitive sentences require more cognitive effort could be explained by 2 things. And that was the central point of our +1 paper, in fact. 2 different hypotheses. 1, the agent preference. 2, something much more linguistic-y within more formal theory, which is Perlmutter's claim about an accusatives being promoted from 2 to 1, that is to object to subject, which was then translated by Burzio into generative grammar notation, but it was the same thing, right? Basically, all things are born objects, and then they move to subject position, right? And some people had argued that the reason why an accusative presented more errors and all those things that I listed before, FS6 have more trouble, blah, 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 were due to that syntactic movement, right? So that the greater cost of the unaccusative reflected the syntactic movement. The agent initial preference tells you or predicts that you will have a harder time with patient subjects because your initial bet is going to be their agents, and then you have to change that bet. So you see, we have 2 hypotheses that can explain cost, right? In the sense that Spanish shows it. But, and here comes the thing, if I reason the cost, so because there is syntactic movement, then I have a hypothesis that explains all the facts, which explains more than what that syntactic movement explains. You see that? So that is, the agent preference explains not only facts about language, it explains facts about cognitive development, and it explains facts about why the grammars are the way they are and make the choices they make. Whereas the Burzio generalization, as it's called in generative grammar, or the promotion from 2 to 1 in Perlmutter's account, is simply restricted to that class of verbs. So what I'm going to put forth to you is that we can do without it and just live with the agent preference, which works dandy, I think. So to finish, what I want to persuade you of, because science is a matter of persuading, it's not so matter of doing one thing and then you finished, is in general and for all the languages we looked at, agent subjects always show greater reactivation, right, than patient subjects in eye tracking. These are the eye tracking conclusions. Agents show the same reactivation pattern regardless of whether they are in a transitive or an intransitive sentence. So this is about agenthood. And as soon as the type of actant is determined, that is, as soon as you know, is this an agent or is this a patient? So when they hear the verb, we see that people move greater greater attentional resources towards the agent. Okay, so basically what we find in this +1 is that if the agent preference is driving language processing, which is what I think is going on, as soon as you hear el ratón, okay? As soon as you hear el ratón, if you record that picture, I'm going to go and look at the cheese, right? If the verb then is something like el ratón roe, I'm going to go, I'm simplifying this, but so that you get the gist. I'm going to go back to the cheese again. But if I see el ratón murió, which happens to be a non-agentive, right? If you see el ratón murió, then people do el ratón murió, and they don't come back to it. It's after we don't care. It's not an agent. We've processed it. Let's move on, right? That's the kind of effect we find. So since the agent preference bias is a cognitive bias, explains everything we found in Basque, plus everything we found in Spanish, plus, I'm simplifying, but it explains also all previous literature, for example, on aphasia, which appeal to the unaccusative hypothesis to explain this asymmetry. We think we can get rid of it. And in general, as you know, in science, getting rid of things is a good thing if you can get by with few things. So this is basically what I put forth to you. And I hope I didn't overstep my time. And thank you again for this opportunity. One second, I forgot. People, very important. I don't do this alone. People, I always like, that's an old photo of our group with some members who are no longer and members that are missing. So I inserted below all that length of people there are authors in the papers that I have been referring to, okay? Because I don't want to make it look like I did it all by myself. Here is Guillén Martínez Alga, Laura Belaplo, who contributes to the volume. Beatriz Gómez is the first author of the +1 paper. Miren Aranceta is second author of the +1 paper, expert in eye tracking. My brother, Jon Laka from La Comercial Deusto, great expert on statistics and big data and terrific professor. Irene de la Cruz, who is a fresh Ramón y Cajal at the University of Deusto, also a member of our group. Jon Andoni Duñabeitia, who is in Nebrija, Madrid, but collaborated with us. Kepa Erdocia and Adam Saviseski, who are colleagues and friends of mine at the research group, because I think this also fits with Jon. When you were talking about organizing BIDE, I remember having been in BIDE. I remember many, many meetings organized by him and the people who were working with him. And I think this is key. Science is not about world's most cited individuals. Science is teamwork. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, eskerrik asko Itziar. Many thanks. I think we have time for some questions. Okay, if somebody wants to ask a question. I have quite a few because this is actually really related to one of the topics I've studied, but yeah. If someone here or online, and I think.
Yeah, I'll say one thing though, about questions. Those people here who are thinking, I have a question, but it's stupid. Don't let the older people make their questions because I can talk to them in the corridors. And so I strongly advise to overcome that fear because nobody ever asks a stupid question, I think.
Yes, this is
Anyway.
right. And as we have students here, it's important to
That's
remind them.
right.
Yes, yes.
Pero bueno, yo no moderé, que si no yo... Vale.
Then I would say that my question is on point because it's probably stupid.
No such thing.
I'm very much persuaded by the conclusions, and I do like how, I mean, of course, you are very good at this, and you gave a great talk, so thank you for that. But I do have a question that is methodological, so it's not maybe that important in the eyes of most people, but it is to me because much of the conclusions are based on the data, right? So I was thinking, you didn't show us the data processing because there is so much to talk about, but I remember a graphic with a bar plot with two roughly similar error terms and a comparison that was significant. I'm very sorry for that. Yeah, the question is, when you are using I track data as evidence, I may be completely wrong, I seem to have understood that it was in scale. And I was wondering whether it shouldn't. Yes. And the question is, was that log transform for the comparison, or are you using like just milliseconds for comparison? Because I guess that in something as reaction times, I'm very sorry then. Okay.
To everybody. But I'll tell you that precisely because the data modeling was complex, that is why we brought my brother to this. So, but I don't think this is the moment. If you don't mind, we can talk about this anytime you like. Okay.
Okay. Any other question? Yeah, I had a question about an accusatives, because if I understood correctly, before I had, but then you said, so an agent is related to the theta role, right? To the way in which an argument is interpreted. It's not relational. I mean, it doesn't depend on the fact if it is another argument or whatever. So it also applies in transitive sentences, the preference for the agent. Then an accusatives take a longer reaction time. I mean,
Spanish.
In Spanish, not in Basque.
Okay.
Oh yeah, because I thought, yeah. So I was wondering, when you were, when you were testing an accusative verbs in Spanish, did you use, I saw the mouse, so did you make any difference between animate or inanimate subjects? I mean, did you take that into account?
I don't know whether I'm using a microphone or not.
It's in red? No, you have to.
Yes. Did we take animas into consideration? Yes. When you're doing language processing, you always have to take animas into consideration.
Okay, yeah.
Since you don't, what we did is we have this paper where all arguments are animate, and then to verify what the effect of animacy was, Beatriz Gomez, whose dissertation is this, has finished another experiment where she has all inanimates, and then you get different effects, because animacy, I mean, different effects. It doesn't affect the asymmetry, but what you see is that, and this is prototypicity, which is also important in language processing. So animates are easier agents, right? Inanimates are harder agents. They can be, but they are harder agents. So typically, if you give people what Beatriz found is if you do inanimates and animates, what you see is that in an accusative sentence, for example, inanimates lessen the cost. If I want to say simply, they lessen the cost a little bit. So we know that animacy always affects this type of measurements. That is why when you do an experiment, either you control for it by doing all arguments animates or all inanimate, and then you do subsequent experiments. You see what I mean? You don't do just one, right? You do several to make sure that this is not driven purely by animacy. Does this answer your question? Okay. No, but animacy is an important factor in this type of prediction. Yeah, because you see an animate, it's easier to predict an agent, right? If you see an inanimate, right?
Yeah, that's clear.
Then you still go for it, but yes, exactly. You hold your bet a little bit.
Right.
No, if there's a student that wants to ask a question, they will definitely have preference. Apparently not. No, I was just wondering, in verbs like an accusative verb like fall, there is a fall, like fall. All right, yeah, okay, in fall. You would, given that we all have the same, basically, semantic makeup, it would be, and it is very useful sometimes to differentiate between cases in which you are falling because you want to, so an agent, and cases in which you are falling simply because they're falling. If something is happening to you, you can fall in order for, if there's a sniper, you can actually fall to the ground so that you don't get shot, or you can just fall because whatever reason, because you have fainted. I was wondering, it's interesting that difference is not marked in general, even in narrative languages, and there are just a few languages in which, in a few verbs, they can differentiate. Now, do you think that you can find a distinction, any distinction based on the semantics of those verbs? So in your examples, could you find differences depending on whether the accusative subject is really an agent or not? Would that actually correlate with any difference? Yeah. Whether you were looking for or you found.
Is have we found anything? I don't know. We have not looked for it. Experimental work is the way it is, and you can answer things like this. But I'll say something about this anyway. Look at Spanish, okay? You don't really say me caí a posta. You say me tiré al suelo. So I highly doubt that an accusative with agents is an expression that makes sense. I think the moment you have an agent, you don't have an accusative. If you characterize an accusative as intransitive verbs that takes a non-agent as argument,
yeah, but
I don't know. I mean, give me data and I'll go. I know that there are languages that are described,
not too many languages,
but I am very skeptical of descriptions of languages where I don't have native linguists telling me what's going on.
No, but a couple of them, but you can also have a transitive subjects. You can, for instance, in Basque, entzun, it equates both to escuchar and oír. And in one of them, we have an agent,
yes,
an experiencer.
Yeah, wait. Okay, there we go. That. When I say now we could talk about what we think about theta roles, right? And I am going with doubting. And I think that in grammar, what you have is proto-agent. That's why I briefly said, for those of you, I was thinking of people like, I'm thinking of proto-agents, right? So experiencer in doubt is, in fact, we are working with experiencers now because they're interesting. But for the case you give me, ensundut, it's a perceptual verb, right? So I am an experiencer. I'm not really an agent. But that's in the subtle world of semantics where very tiny distinctions are made. The way I'm conceiving of theta roles in sentences is a la doughty. So via entailments, you decide who gets to be proto-agent. That's the only decision you make in doughty. Okay, so that experiencers, you all want to go for lunch, but experiencers are interesting. That's why we're working with them now, right? Because that's the next thing you want to look at. So we are now working with the person I didn't mention here because we haven't published yet anything, and we are looking at what happens with experiencer. Do we get different processing patterns when we compare pure agents and experiencers? Or since doughty predicts that they're going to end up being proto-agents, that's exactly the question that we are asking. And why do sometimes experiencers end up being subjects and other times not? Typically not when something more proto-agent-like accompanies them, and therefore they win in that decision. Am I trying to convey this? So your question is very well taken, and that's exactly the question we have. So we want to see now, that's the path that we are following, how theta roles match into grammar, and looking always experimentally and from a processing standpoint, and particularly what we are pursuing, our working hypothesis, is that if you take doughty's system, it is giving you a processing account of how you map subjects and objects, which happens to be very similar to other proposals in language processing, like cue retrieval mechanisms to deal with agreement errors and things like that. I don't know whether, because now I'm talking about the stuff we are doing, and maybe I am not very clear, but yes, when I've been talking here about agents and patients, I'm thinking in these sort of broad categories. Certainly, our first works have been with agents, and patients. And now we are starting looking into goals versus experiencers. Then within the patient planet, there are many proposals, right? So people who work on the semantic part of language give you a vast array of different possible thematic relations. And I think those exist because we understand their differences. The planet where I am working is not there, but it's like, how do those gel into subject and object? And that's where I think proto-agent and proto-thing is the way to go.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So we finish here. Itziar's contribution. Eskerrik asko, Itziar, berriro. Eskerrik asko.
I'm just going to let anybody who, well, first of all, thank you, Itziar, for your contribution to this talk, and thank you, Anne, for your help. We have a couple minutes left before we end this event, and I would like to offer the audience here and in remote any for some minutes or so, if anybody wants to bring any comments on the figure of Jon, on the figure of this book, the events, and anything related. So feel free, and you're more than welcome to say any words you wish to say. No? Okay. So in that case, I think we have come to an end, and we would like to thank you all for coming. But before we do that, we would like a special moment for Alasne, who is Jon's wife, and who would offer to give us some words.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. A mí no me gusta agradecer a las instituciones, los organismos, porque me parece que esconden el trabajo, el esfuerzo y el sacrificio de las personas individuales que lo componen. Pero bueno, hoy tengo que hacer una excepción con la Universidad de Deusto. Es mi primera alma mater, es donde Jon y yo nos conocimos en segundo de carrera. Y quería dar las gracias así a la Universidad de Deusto, a la institución, por permitir los distintos actos de homenaje que han tenido lugar hacia la figura de Jon, por servir de marco para estos homenajes. Y bueno, a quien haya que agradecer pues por promover hoy la presentación pública del libro, porque no todos los libros se presentan públicamente. Estoy muy agradecida. Pasando a las personas individuales, muchas gracias al decano por venir y por las palabras que ha tenido hacia Jon. Me gustaría tenerlo por escrito para compartirlo con mis hijos cuando acabe todo esto. Ha dicho cosas que son muy importantes para nosotros, como es el reconocimiento del trabajo de Jon, de su esfuerzo. A nosotros nos ha parecido siempre que probablemente la universidad no era consciente. Y bueno, si ahora son conscientes y se lo agradecen y lo recuerdan o lo valoran, para nosotros es muy importante. Muchas de las cosas que hizo Jon, porque el día tiene las horas que tiene y la semana pues los días que tiene. Muchas de las cosas que hizo Jon, aunque le salían del corazón, fueron sacrificando el tiempo a la familia. Y bueno, no voy a elaborar eso, sino creo que acabaría con resentimiento y no quiero, es un momento de agradecimiento, estoy muy agradecida. Por supuesto, estoy muy agradecida a Irene y a Alex por lo que han hecho hoy, por lo que han hecho por el libro, pero sobre todo porque acabaron la organización de los encuentros de lingüística vasca que yo no había comenzado el último año. Se iba a celebrar en el año 21, pues justo en el mes de septiembre, que es cuando falleció, y que se celebrara ese año en diciembre, pues que eso acabara, fue muy importante para nosotros. Y creo que lamentablemente con su muerte se ha hecho evidente el apoyo que él que él tenía hacia la lingüística vasca, aunque no era su campo. No era sobre la lingüística, sino quizás más importante, bueno, al euskera, aunque él no lo hablaba, sino a las personas que se esforzaban en hacer investigación sobre la lingüística vasca, sobre el euskera. Apoyaba a las personas y le dedicaba mucho tiempo a eso. Obviamente apoyaba a sus antiguos alumnos y colaboraba para que sus alumnos tuvieran una carrera. Estaba muy orgulloso de ellos y para nosotros como familia fue muy importante que esos encuentros del año 21 se realizaran. Os lo agradezco mucho. Por supuesto también la realización del libro, porque editar un libro es muchísimo trabajo, muchísimo trabajo. Entonces os agradezco a los dos ese esfuerzo, sacrificio que os habrá supuesto de horas por encima de vuestras obligaciones docentes y de investigación y familiares. Y os agradezco muchísimo el tacto con el que nos tratasteis a la familia en un momento tan delicado. Ha tenido que ser complicado. A mí no me habría gustado tener que tratar conmigo misma. Así os lo agradezco muchísimo, a la delicadeza y todo. Las personas que han participado en el libro, bueno, antes de hablar de las personas que han participado en el libro, quería hacer una mención al prólogo de Jon Urbina, porque es tan maravilloso, está hecho con tanto cariño y yo creo que tiene que ser tan complicado hacer una cosa así para un compañero tuyo al que conoces en sus virtudes y sus defectos. Está hecho con tanto cariño que Eukene lo tiene, bueno, Jon ya lo sabe, Eukene lo tiene enmarcado en su casa en Miami. Bueno, siempre será parte de nosotros. Es un prólogo, es muy bonito y refleja a Jon, que es lo importante, porque a veces cuando una persona se muere, pues se convierte en una leyenda, todo es bueno. Bueno, nosotros sentimos que refleja a Jon. Muchísimas gracias. La mayoría un gran buen número de las personas que han participado en el volumen, que participaron en el encuentro de lingüística vasca y que participaron en los anteriores encuentros de lingüística vasca fueron alumnos de Jon. Los antiguos alumnos de Jon es que eran unas personas fundamentales en su vida. A veces también si empiezo a hablar sacaría a lo mejor un poco de resentimiento porque les dedicaba muchísimo tiempo. Si Jon comía más con antiguos alumnos que conmigo, o sea, yo no recuerdo haber comido con Jon más que a lo mejor algún fin de semana. Entonces era una dedicación tan grande que, bueno, la Universidad de Deusto es imposible que lo sepa. Yo creo que incluso los propios alumnos, porque cada uno sabrá lo que le dedicaba a él o a ella, pero era muchísimo. Y entonces lo que yo les quiero decir es muchísimas gracias por haber participado en los distintos encuentros de lingüística vasca, por haber participado en el libro. Jon estaría muy, muy orgulloso de ellos. Jon estaba muy orgulloso de ellos ya, pero lo que los alumnos han seguido haciendo, sus antiguos alumnos, que ahora muchos son lingüistas reconocidos y otros lo serán dentro de poco. Bueno, Jon estaba muy orgulloso. Era parte muy importante de nuestra vida, aunque nos fastidiara un poco a los de la familia. Y los alumnos que están aquí, que no lo han tenido, a lo mejor que no lo van a tener, cuando oigan hablar de Jon como profesor, es posible que oigan pues, que si les ponía una canción de heavy metal al principio para espabilarles, o a lo mejor su manera de dar las clases, pero no es eso lo que se han perdido. Lo que se han perdido es una persona que era capaz de ver lo que todos los alumnos tenían, lo que podían dar, posibilidades que no son tan obvias para todos. Es muy fácil ver cuando una persona brillante, no sé, hay personas que son abiertamente brillantes desde el principio y es fácil tener fe en ellos, pero yo tenía fe en todo tipo de alumnado. Y alumnos que a lo mejor les faltaba la fe en sí mismos y yo no era capaz de sacar eso. Entonces, eso es lo que se han perdido. También se han perdido una dedicación extrema a ellos. Jon se acostaba siempre a las 4 de la mañana, estaba siempre capeándose con alumnos, escribía cartas de recomendación, les miraba sus statements of purpose, que a mí mismo no me sale cómo se dice en castellano. Era una dedicación total. Eso es lo que se han perdido. Quería también hablar, si no os importa, sabiendo que está escuchando esto desde Miami, pues hacer una mención a una de las coautoras del libro, que es Eukene. Eukene, cuando decidió estudiar estudios vascos en una universidad del entorno, es que a veces se refieren así a la Universidad de las Noticias de Deusto y a mí me gusta usarlo, una universidad del entorno. Otra universidad local también. Cuando decidí estudiar estudios vascos empezamos a llamarla en casa Franco Landa 97, que junto con Franco Landa 98 son los mejores proyectos que nosotros hemos realizado. Franco Landa 97, pues empezamos a hacer muchísimos chistes porque creíamos que ya que nos lleva tanto la contraria en casa, alguna vez nos llevaría la contraria por escrito. Y entonces hacíamos chistes sobre Landa Franco 97 contra Landa y Franco, o Franco y Landa, lo que sea. Bueno, Franco Landa 97 me está escuchando ahora y yo quiero que sepa que estamos muy orgullosos de ella. Eukene badakizu oso arron nagoela zutaz. Perdón por no hacerlo todo en euskera como a ella le habría gustado, porque además el euskera es su vida. Eukene participó en las jornadas también en el 20, estando su padre muy enfermo. Participó en el 21 recién fallecido y ha participado en este volumen. Franco Landa 97 tiene una fuerza que le viene de su padre, son iguales, es tan imparable como él. Y bueno, yo desde aquí, porque está escuchando y perdón por a los demás que tienes que escucharlo, Eukene, te quiero mucho y estoy muy orgullosa de ti y Aita también lo estaría. Nada más. Porque no solo por la presentación, Itziar ha participado en el homenaje a Jon de distintas maneras, como coautora, y como esta presentación tan maravillosa que ha dado Itziar, para los que la acaban de conocer, ya han visto cómo presenta, es capaz de presentar de manera interesante la guía telefónica que ya no existe. Muchísimas gracias, ¿no? Y no sabes cómo agradezco también que te acuerdes de cómo nos conocimos, ¿no? Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, horrekin ja bukatutzat emango dugu. Eskerrik asko etortzeagatik, entzuteagatik, eta jarraituko dugu lan egiten ikaslei begira eta ikasleak animatzen hizkuntzalaritzan parte hartzeko. Eskerrik asko.